Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Flores, and I am a grant program specialist with the Legal Assistance for Victims Unit, also known as LAV. And I will be introducing my colleagues as we progress in the presentation. Welcome to the pre-application information session for the fiscal year 2025 Expanding Legal Services Initiative, Legal Assistance for Victims Grant Program, also referred to by its acronym ELSI. The Office on Violence Against Women, also referred to as OVW, is convening this pre-application session to go over the fiscal year 2025 Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, for ELSI. I will be joined today by my colleagues, Michelle Avery Weston, Ed Siegman, who will be speaking later in the presentation, as well as Sandy Van Orden, who will support in answering questions. The purpose of this session is to provide information regarding the ELSI NOFO. We will highlight a few key points in this presentation. However, it is not the intent, nor is there sufficient time to go over every aspect of the NOFO. All applicants are responsible for reading the fiscal year 2025 ELSI NOFO and the OVW NOFO companion guide and ensuring that a complete application is submitted. LAV program staff cannot provide any feedback to applicants about the quality of an applicant's proposal or provide any information outside of what is presented in the NOFO. However, we will be available throughout the period that the NOFO is open to respond to any questions about application requirements. Please feel free to send questions about the ELSI NOFO to the LAV program email box at ovw.elsi@usdoj.gov or call the main line at 202-307-6026. We are reading the presentation today from a script, but we will pause periodically throughout this presentation to answer your questions live. It will be helpful to have the ELSI NOFO in front of you for a point of reference during this information session. You may take a moment now to open it if you have not done so already. Also, we will send these slides to you after the webinar, so please do not feel that you must remember everything we tell you here. You may use the presentation alongside the NOFO and the companion guide as you prepare your application. And finally, please note that yesterday there was a separate presentation discussing the Legal Assistance for Victims Grant Program, NOFO, which is separate from ELSI. The recording of that presentation will be available at the OVW website in the coming days. Next slide. Deadlines. On the cover of the NOFO, please note that final applications are due by 8:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, January 30th. Please refer to pages 25 through 27 of the NOFO for more information on submission and intermediate deadlines. Please note that OVW will not accept late applications, so applicants are strongly encouraged to begin submitting their applications 48 hours prior to the application deadline and to carefully review the OVW policy on late submissions, which can be found on pages 28 to 30 of the NOFO. OVW anticipates notifying all applicants of funding decisions by October 1 of 2025. Next slide. Eligibility. Eligibility is mentioned briefly on the cover of the NOFO, as well as in more details on pages 6 through 7. Eligible applicants include private nonprofit entities, territorial organizations, Indian tribal governments, including Indian tribal consortia and tribal organizations. Eligible applicants are limited to the above organizations that, number one, as their mission or purpose, serve victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. The organization may be a larger multi-service organization that does not solely address domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, but has a distinct division or program that has the mission or purpose of serving victims of these crimes, and number two, do not currently offer in-house legal representation for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking by attorneys who are employed by the applicant. Next slide. LAB program description. Page 4 of the NOFO provides background on the history and goals of the ELSI LAB program description. The LAB grant program is intended to increase the availability of civil and criminal legal assistance needed to effectively aid victims ages 11 and older of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. The LAB program provides funds for comprehensive direct legal services to victims in legal matters relating to or arising out of that abuse or violence. Comprehensive legal services should address the broad spectrum of legal issues that victims encounter. In addition to representation in emergency and non-emergency protection order hearings, this includes representation in family matters, divorce, child custody or child support, consumer or housing matters, and credit restoration. For our purposes, planned services, there will be more on this later, must include legal representation by a licensed attorney. In addition to an attorney, legal assistance may also be provided by some other qualified professional, including BIA accredited representatives in immigration proceedings, VA authorized representatives in VA claims, or anyone who functions as an attorney or lay advocate in tribal court. Next slide. Program description continued. Any services unrelated to the provision of legal assistance or legal advocacy are unallowable under the LAB grant program. However, examples of activities beyond direct legal services that may be supported with LAB funds include advocacy, as long as the advocate is providing services related to the legal assistance, for example, safety planning, court accompaniment, and preparation for court appearances. Translation services, if related to the legal services. Child care directly related to legal assistance. For example, child care to enable the victim to meet with their attorney or to go to court. And transportation related to the legal assistance. For example, travel to meet with the lawyer or to go to court. Please note that the LAB grant program funds may not be used to provide criminal defense services. However, funds can be used to provide post-conviction relief to survivors if the matter is relating to or arising from domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, If you provide services that are unrelated to legal services in connection with your project, you should make it clear in your proposal that ELSI funds will only be used to support allowable activities. Next slide. ELSI program description. ELSI is intended to allow eligible organizations that do not currently offer in-house legal services to establish a program that provides legal representation to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. To facilitate the development of a legal program, grantee organizations will participate in a planning period that we expect to last approximately 12 to 18 months. During that time, grantees will participate in intensive training and technical assistance, develop supervision and mentoring plans for the attorneys who will eventually work on the project, develop written legal practice policies and protocols, determine whether to begin working with other organizations as formal project partners, and hire an attorney to provide legal services. On this last point, please note that there is a limited exception for tribal grantees providing legal services in tribal courts, where lay advocates can provide legal representation. For these grantees only, the requirement to hire an attorney to provide legal representation may alternatively be satisfied by hiring a tribal legal advocate. However, given the purpose of ELSI, tribal applicants should still plan to hire a staff attorney, and in their proposal should still budget funds for a staff attorney. For all grantees, upon completion of the planning period, grantees will then obtain final approval from OVW and begin providing legal services. Next slide. Purpose area. Funds under this program must be used for the statutory purpose area listed on the slide. You will also find this information on page 9 of the NOFO. Please review this section carefully, as project activities funded through ELSI must fall under this purpose area. Next slide. Statutory considerations, tribal programs. Pursuant to the LAV statute, at least 3% of funds made available for the LAV program, which includes ELSI, must be used for projects that assist adult and youth victims of domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, and sexual assault on lands within the jurisdiction of an Indian tribe. Applications proposing to assist such victims will receive special consideration in order to meet this requirement, but they must include the percentage of proposed activities that will support services to victims on tribal lands. Next slide. Activities that compromise victim safety. OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter or prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. Please refer to the OVW NOFO companion guide for additional details. Please note, applications that propose any activities that compromise victim safety and recovery or undermine offender accountability may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated from consideration entirely. Next slide. Out of scope activities. The LAV program, ELSI, has specific out of scope activities that will not be supported by this program. We have highlighted some of these activities in the slide, but a couple of examples include providing representation in tort cases and developing or hosting training at the community or state level. A complete list of out of scope activities and unallowable activities and unallowable costs can be found on pages 11 through 12. It is important to review these lists thoroughly, as applications that propose activities deemed to be substantially out of scope may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated from consideration. Next slide. Federal award information. The NOFO provides details on the federal award information on page 4. All awards are subject to the availability of appropriated funds and any modifications or additional requirements that may be imposed by law. There is no guarantee that funds will be available in the future. However, OVW may elect to make awards in a future fiscal year for the application submitted under this NOFO, but not selected for fiscal year 2025 funding, depending on the merits of the application and the availability of funding. The grant period award is for 24 months, beginning on October 1, 2025. ELSI grantees may be eligible for an additional 36 months of non-competitive funding to continue their projects. If OVW has sufficient appropriated funds and the grant has complied with the fiscal and programmatic requirements of the award. Next slide. Award amounts. ELSI is making awards for up to $400,000 for the 24-month period. All awards will be made as grants. Note that we may award amounts that differ from what the applicant requested and to negotiate the scope of work and budget with an applicant. Next slide. Applicant types. You may follow along on pages 8 to 9 of the NOFO for this slide. Because ELSI is only in its second year, all applicants will be considered new. Note that current LAV grantees are generally not eligible for ELSI. However, applicants that meet the eligibility criteria may be eligible to apply for ELSI if their awards are ending on or before September 30th, 2024, and they do not have a substantial amount of unobligated remaining funds by March 31st, 2024. Additionally, project partners of current LAV grantees may be eligible if they do not currently provide in-house legal services and they meet all other eligible criteria. Finally, be aware that though you may apply for both ELSI and LAV grant program, you will not receive both. Again, if you didn't catch all of this, no worries. This information is in the NOFO, and you will have access to our slide deck and a recording of this webinar. We are going to pause for the next slide and go into questions. So if anyone would like to raise their hand, please, and ask a question, and we will answer. And it looks like we don't have anyone raising their hand, Sandy, so I'll just go ahead and read the questions in our Q&A box, and starting with question 1.
All right.
Are we eligible to apply for this grant? We are a mental health agency funded by the county. We provide counseling for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault.
Okay. So I think I might need more information on what you mean by funded by the county. If what you mean is that your mental health agency is part of the county government, you are not eligible to apply. However, if you are a nonprofit organization with the mission or purpose, or with a division that has the mission or purpose to provide direct services to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, then you would be eligible to apply.
Okay. Next question. How do we determine the correct hourly rate to pay an attorney when we start doing direct services? We wouldn't want to use our whole budget for only attorney hours.
So a rate of pay is going to vary widely by where you are, and attorney rates of pay are different for those in private practice, those who work for law firms, those who work for nonprofits, those who work for government entities. I would suggest looking at information to in your service area on what a common rate is. And then I will also say that 12 to 18 months of the initial 12 to 18 months of this award are is the planning phase with training and technical assistance by our TA providers, who can also help you to refine that pay scale as you move into the project if you are selected for funding.
We have a participant who wants to ask a question. She raised her hand. Catherine?
Yes, my question is, can we apply jointly with our local legal aid program? We have had a clinic for many years with them, but unfortunately it had to close during the pandemic, and we have not had the funds since then to restart it.
So this program is about establishing legal representation in your organization.
Okay.
If you want to do a project where you are partnering with your local legal aid organization, you should look at the legal assistance for victims notification of funding opportunity, because that is an opportunity that would allow for partnerships where your organization would not be bringing on an attorney.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sandy, I'm going to go back to the Q&A. Next question is, so even if a LLLT or LP has passed the bar and is licensed to work in Washington, they still do not qualify?
Right. So the requirements for this grant program is that you do not currently offer legal representation by a licensed attorney, and you want to develop a program that will provide legal representation by a licensed attorney. In order to be a good fit for this grant program, you need to have the intention of bringing on a licensed attorney.
Okay. Next question. Could you please explain the meaning of post-conviction relief, slide 5? Thank you.
Post-conviction relief would be things like expungements.
Next question. If you have an attorney on staff, is that sufficient or do you have to hire one?
So if you have an attorney who is providing representation to clients of your organization, this is not the appropriate grant program for you, because this program is for organizations that do not currently have an attorney and want to set up a legal program. If you already have a legal program, you likely want to look at the Legal Assistance for Victims Grant Program Notification of Funding Opportunity. And after we're done with these questions, I will make sure that the link to that NOFO is included in the chat.
Okay, next question. Do I understand this correctly? During the planning phase, we need to hire a supervising attorney on a contract basis. They would help us set up the program and help determine how we would supervise an attorney.
A supervising attorney does not if you plan to hire an attorney who will need a supervising attorney, you could either hire a supervising attorney on staff, or you could contract with an attorney who could provide supervision for your staff attorney. You will make the determination on how you're going to do that during the planning phase. You will not be able to use these funds to provide representation until after you have completed the planning phase, and that will include hiring an attorney, and if that attorney needs supervision, ensuring that an appropriate supervisor is in place.
And our last question is, if the applicant is a foundation and the foundation's 501c3 mission is to serve victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking, By supporting financially the Justice Center, a government unit, is the foundation eligible to apply?
So in order to be eligible for these funds, your organization or a subdivision of your organization must have the mission or purpose to provide direct services to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. So if your organization does not provide direct services, you are not eligible for these funds.
Okay, we got one more question. Couple more that are sneaking in there on us. Do funded ELSI projects then become eligible for directly applying for the LAV award once their program is successfully established?
So ELSI, there's an initial 2-year award, and that includes a 12 to 18-month planning phase and the beginning of services. After successful completion of that 2 years, it is determined if those awardees are eligible for non-competitive continuation funding. If they are deemed eligible, they would receive a 36-month non-competitive award to provide their legal services. After that 5-year period of the initial award and the non-competitive continuation, then the appropriate funding source to apply under would be the Legal Assistance for Victims program.
All right, Sandy, should we stop there and pick up? Because there's a couple more.
Yes, let's continue on with the project. I'll keep answering questions as we can, and we will have a couple more opportunities for people to answer questions throughout the presentation.
Wonderful. Okay, so moving along with our presentation, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Ed.
Thank you, Maria. And hello, everyone. My name is Ed Siefman, and I am also a member of the LAV team at OVW. So we're going to resume the presentation with a discussion of the delivery of legal assistance certification. The delivery of legal assistance certification is a letter that must be included with every application. Details can be found on pages 23 and 24 of the NOFO. Next slide, please. Application and submission information is included in the NOFO beginning on page 13. The complete application package is available on grants.gov or at the OVW website at www.justice.gov/OVW. Applicants wishing to request a paper copy of the application materials should contact ovw.elsi@usdoj.gov or 202-307-6026. Applicants should anticipate that failure to submit an application that contains all of the specified elements will negatively affect the review of the application and may result in the application not being considered for funding. It is the responsibility of the applicant to ensure that a complete application is submitted by the deadline. OVW will not contact applicants for missing items. Applicants should refer to the chart on pages 27 and 28 of the NOFO to ensure that all required items are submitted. Applicants should submit only documents that are specifically asked for in the NOFO. Providing information that was not requested, such as letters of support from other organizations in your community or service area, will not increase the likelihood that an application will be selected for funding. So, when in doubt about a document that is not specifically required, refrain from submitting it. Next slide, please. Please carefully review the formatting and technical requirements on page 13. Points may be deducted for applications that do not adhere to the formatting and technical requirements. Please read the entire list of requirements. The ELSI NOFO is very competitive and attention to detail is imperative. Next slide, please. Applications must include all of the required documents. 1, a proposal narrative. This component must include the purpose of the application, what will be done, and who will implement the project sections. Please refer to page 14 of the NOFO for complete details. 2, a budget detail worksheet and narrative. This section must include a budget and budget narrative that links clearly to the project activities specified in the proposal narrative. The budget should not contain items that are not set forth in the proposal narrative. You should include your budget as an attachment to your application. A sample budget is included as an appendix to the NOFO, and a webinar on creating a budget is available on the OVW website. Applications that do not include both required components will be considered substantially incomplete and will not be considered for funding. OVW will not contact applicants for missing documents. Next slide, please. Data requested with the application consists of 3 sets of questions: the pre-award risk assessment, the applicant questionnaire, and the summary data sheet. You will complete each as a survey directly in Just Grants. These are not scored, but are required elements of your application. A list of the questions for each item is included on pages 48 to 51 of the NOFO in the appendices. Next slide, please. Although the proposal abstract will not be scored, your application should include an abstract that does not exceed 2 double-spaced pages. This section should not be a summary of past accomplishments. The abstract will be entered into a text box in Just Grants. Applicants are strongly encouraged to see the description for the required abstract on page 14 of the NOFO. Next slide, please. The proposal narrative component should not exceed 20 double-spaced pages and must include the required 3 sections: the purpose of the application, what will be done, and who will implement the project. Reviewers will not read more than 20 double-spaced pages. If your application is not double-spaced, reviewers will only read the equivalent of 20 double-spaced pages. The remainder of the project narrative will not be scored. Make sure that you respond to every question within each of the sections. See pages 14 to 18 of the NOFO for more information. Next slide, please. As mentioned previously, your application will require a budget and budget narrative. You will include your budget as an attachment to your application. OVW strongly encourages you to use a spreadsheet program such as Excel or Numbers to complete your budget attachment. Your budget must reflect 24 months of project activity. As indicated on the slide, you need to include funds to attend OVW-sponsored training and technical assistance in the amount of $20,000 for proposals from organizations located within the 48 contiguous states and $24,000 for organizations located within the territories, Hawaii, or Alaska. Please note this amount is for the entire 24 months and not per year. You may budget for more than this minimum amount to attend relevant non-OVW sponsored conferences or training. Please note that though the budget and the budget narrative should be supporting your proposal narrative activities, they will be reviewed separately from the proposed project narrative. Because of this, your budget narrative must describe each line item requested in the budget and explain all costs included in the budget, including how the costs of goods and services are determined and how they will fulfill the objectives of the project. At this point, I'm going to introduce one of our colleagues from OVW's Grants Financial Management Division, Lisa Young, and she's going to present the information in the next several slides. If you could advance to the next slide, please.
Thank you. In the next couple of slides, we are going to focus on aspects of your application that relate to the documents that our financial team, the Grants Financial Management Division, or GFMD, reviews. More specifically, we'll discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior year's applications that could help with expediting our review process. So for today, we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide you with a link to a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that will be included in your application. First, we'll highlight the items identified in the summary data sheet, which is completed by all applicants. Specifically, two items that we would like to discuss are the single audit responses and the IRS three-step safe harbor procedure. OVW requests that all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $1 million or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, then they indicate that and also specify the end date of their last fiscal year. However, GFMD is finding that applicants do not always include all of this information. Please ensure that this question is answered in its entirety on the summary data sheet. Question number 3. Another item that we'd like to highlight from the solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations. If you use the IRS three-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you are required to provide a disclosure letter. Please refer to the solicitation for further details and a link to a sample letter, or the NOFO in this case. Note that there are 4 required parts of the disclosure letter. The sample letter provided outlines all 4 parts of the disclosure, so please be sure to follow the sample and provide a response to each of the 4 pieces. The next item that we'd like to discuss is the pre-award risk assessment questions, which assists GFMD during their pre-award risk assessment review for all applications. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 11 questions, and each question has multiple parts. We've noticed from prior years that applicants do not always fully answer all parts of the questions, which in turn requires GFMD to reach out to the applicant, and that may delay funding decisions. Some of the most common issues that we've encountered have been, for example, question number 2, where the applicant indicates that they do indeed have internal policies, but they don't provide a list of topics covered in their policies and procedures. On question number 3, some applicants fail to provide a brief summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not it tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. These are just a few examples, but in general, please make sure that you read each piece of each question and provide a full and comprehensive response. Next slide, please. This next slide will quickly highlight some resources that are available as you're creating the budget to be submitted with your application. This year, GFMD has developed a detailed webinar presentation on how to develop a budget to be submitted with OVW applications. This webinar addresses some of the challenges that you may face with your budgets and provides some insight on OVW's budget review process. This webinar can be found at the link on this slide. And next is the uniform guidance, which can be found at 2 CFR 200. Use your favorite search engine for this one. And other resources include the DOJ financial guide and the NOFO itself. Thanks, Ed.
Thank you, Lisa. We really appreciate you being here with us this afternoon for this webinar. It was very helpful to have you speaking to all of our participants today. Next slide, please. So we know that this can be a lot of information to process. So if you have any questions about the GFMD information that was discussed, please feel free to contact the GFMD Help Desk at 888-514-8556 or by email at ovw.gfmd@usdoj.gov. Next slide, please. Pages 23 to 25 of the NOFO provide information about additional documents that will not be scored during the review process, but which should be included with your application. Failure to include any of these may result in your application being removed from consideration. Next slide, please. Recipients of OVW funds must comply with applicable federal civil rights laws, which, among other things, prohibit recipients from discriminating on the basis of national origin and disability. This includes taking reasonable steps to ensure meaningful access to grantees' programs and activities for individuals with disabilities, individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, and individuals with limited English proficiency. Applicants must include funds or other resources in their budget that support activities to ensure access for these individuals. See page 33 of the NOFO for more information on these requirements. Next slide, please. And at this point, we're going to take another break and pause to answer some more questions. So if there's anybody who would like to raise their hand to ask a question, we could start with those questions. And not seeing anybody at the moment. And so if there aren't any, then I'll go to the Q&A box. And at the moment, there's just one question. Oh, now there's two. But I'll start at the top. Can you please remind us what pages in the NOFO note that the attorney must be hired as staff of our organization for the program?
Yes. So page 10 makes note of the need to hire an attorney for services. Page 19 in the budget, where the budget requires that you include funds for a staff attorney to provide legal representation. And yes, those two locations.
Okay, right. Thank you, Sandy. Next question is an audit required?
And I can answer that question.
Thank you, Lisa.
So I believe what you're talking about is the single audit requirement. And that is a requirement of 2 CFR 200.501. And that requires any non-federal entity that expends $1 million or more during their past fiscal year to have a single audit. And that single audit needs to be uploaded to the federal audit clearinghouse. That's the only audit that OVW requires. And it's only
Okay.
for those people who have expended $1 million or more in their most recent fiscal year.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. And the final question we have is, let's see, our organization solely serves survivors from federally designated rural locations. Does this category qualify as an underserved population? It is not specifically listed under the purpose of proposals section of the NOFO.
I think you could include that in that section. Because you should be describing the communities that you plan to serve in the geographic service area of the proposed project.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Sandy. And we got another question in the Q&A box. Let's see. Sorry if this has been asked and answered, but how will we access the recording after the meeting?
The recording will be posted on OVW's website.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So that's it for the questions now. And at this point, I'm going to turn the presentation over to my colleague, Michelle.
Thank you, Ed. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle Avery Weston, and like Ed and Sandy and Maria, I am a grants management specialist in the LAV unit, and I'm happy to be with you here today. Could we move to the next slide, please? When you're looking at how to apply, we want to let you know that you can find this funding opportunity on grants.gov by using the CFDA number, the grants.gov opportunity number, or the title of this NOFO, all of which can be found on the cover page of the NOFO. The FY 2025 application submission process is a two-step process. Application materials will be submitted in grants.gov and Just Grants. We recommend starting the application process, even just the grants.gov and Just Grants registration process, as soon as possible to allow time to learn the system. Next slide, please. Read the NOFO carefully to understand all steps required to submit an application and the time required to complete those steps. Some steps, such as obtaining a unique entity identifier or UEI number, or registering with the System for Award Management, SAM, or grants.gov, may take several days to complete. We recommend that applicants begin these processes as soon as possible, but no later than the date suggested in the NOFO. Next. Next slide, please. Thank you. Applicants must complete the application for federal assistance, also known as the SF-424, in grants.gov. The specific information required for this step is included on page 26 of the NOFO. Applicants must also complete and submit the disclosure of lobbying activities on the form SF-LLL in grants.gov. After submitting these two forms, each applicant will receive an email notification to complete the rest of the application in Just Grants. If the applicant is a new user in Just Grants, the email will include instructions on registering with Just Grants. Next slide, please. Applicants will submit the full application, including attachments, in Just Grants. In the Just Grants system, applicants will enter some application information directly into text boxes and surveys. and upload some documents as attachments. We have included the following major elements of the application as examples of what applicants will submit in Just Grants. The proposal abstract will be entered into a text box. The pre-award risk assessment, applicant questionnaire, and summary data sheet will be completed as surveys directly in Just Grants. The proposal narrative, as well as the budget worksheet and budget narrative, will be uploaded as attachments. And the Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, or the Memorandum of Exemption, MOE, will be uploaded as an attachment. In addition to these major elements, other documentation will be required for all applications or when applicable. Read the NOFO carefully for a full description of all items required. Next slide, please. In Just Grants, each applying entity will have an assigned entity administrator who is responsible for managing entity-level information and assigning roles in the system. The entity administrator is also the eBiz POC designated in sam.gov. For more information on registering with Just Grants, please refer to the website justicegrants.usdoj.gov. Within 24 hours of Just Grants receiving your application from grants.gov, the user submitting the application in grants.gov and the SAM eBiz POC will receive an email to register for a Just Grants account. The email is from DOJ's Secure User Management System, and in parentheses you see DIAMD. We call it Diamond, this email will include instructions on how to create an account. To ensure that you receive these emails and that they are not flagged as spam, we recommend adding this email address here that you see on the screen, diamd-no-reply@usdoj.gov, to the trusted sender list in your email settings. Next slide, please. The eBiz POC at the applicant organization serves as the entity administrator and must log into Just Grants to confirm the entity's profile and add users. The user submitting the application in Just Grants serves as the application submitter. Within minutes of completing their Just Grants account registration, the application submitter and the entity administrator will receive an email from Just Grants with a link to the application that was started in grants.gov. Alternatively, the application submitter can log into Just Grants and locate the pending application in their work list on the home landing page of Just Grants. The application number listed on Just Grants will be identical to the 9-digit number that begins with grant on grants.gov. Next slide, please. Each lead applicant must have at least one authorized representative designated in Just Grants. An authorized representative is an individual with documented authority to sign an agreement with the federal government. Before the application is submitted, the entity administrator must log into Just Grants to review the authorized representatives associated with the organization. If an authorized representative does not have a Just Grants account, the entity administrator will need to invite them to register. Within minutes of being invited to be an authorized representative, the individual will receive an email from diamond-no-reply@usdoj.gov with instructions on how to create an account in DOJ's Secure User Management System. Once the authorized representative receives the email and completes the steps to create an account, the authorized representative will be available in Just Grants. Next slide. The application submitter will complete the application by entering data into web-based forms and text boxes, uploading attachments, and accepting assurances and certifications. The application submitter will also need to select the authorized representatives. Once all sections are completed, the application submitter will submit the application. The application submitter, the entity administrator, and the authorized representative will then receive an email from Just Grants confirming successful submission of the application. Next slide. The Department of Justice has made a collection of self-guided training resources, including training and a virtual Q&A session on application submission. This is available at the website displayed on this slide. And I'll give you a moment to take a look at that. And remember, again, this will be available to you after this session is finished. Next slide, please. Final applications are due in Just Grants by 8:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, January 30th, 2025. Carefully review the How to Apply and the Submission Dates and Times sections on pages 26 and 27 of the NOFO to see applicant actions and required deadlines, and to see OVW's policy on late submissions. Submitting the application components at least 48 hours before each deadline in both grants.gov or Just Grants as applicable will enable applicants to receive notice of a failed submission and provide an opportunity to correct the error before the application deadline. Next slide. Applicants should submit only one application per program. If an applicant submits multiple versions of an application, OVW will review the most recent version submitted. Next slide. OVW offers several options for an applicant to provide advance notice of a delayed application. Applicants should thoroughly familiarize themselves with OVW's policy on late submissions, found on pages 27 through 30 of the NOFO. Extensions are rarely granted. Failure to begin the registration or application submission processes in sufficient time is not an acceptable reason for a late application submission. Next slide. So as we're nearing the end of our presentation today, we have some helpful tips that we'd like to share. These tips may improve your chances on becoming an ELSI grant recipient. Please note that the following list is not a guarantee that you will be funded, but rather a guide to navigate you through the OVW application process. First, please read the NOFO in its entirety. It's important to make sure you do not miss out on any important information by just skimming through the NOFO and focusing on the How to Apply section. Read the NOFO and contact LAV staff or submit your inquiry to the LAV email box if you have any questions. Keep in mind that the people reviewing your application are not familiar with your organization or your work. Please write your application accordingly. It is not simply enough to state that your organization will meet the program requirements. When writing your application, you should show us how you plan to implement the requirements. As many of us know, survivors are not one-dimensional, and neither are their needs. Your application should reflect that. Please describe how you will address the complex needs of all survivors in your community, including those who may be part of specific cultural or historically underserved groups. Rather than using national data in your application, please take care to find recently collected local data if you can. If that information is not available to you and you choose to use other data, please note that in your application that recent local data is not available. Next slide. Please be sure that your budget can support the goals and objectives in your narrative. Being overly ambitious is not to your benefit. To ensure that your application is feasible and accurately conveys your organization's capacity, Involve multiple members of your organization when reviewing your application. In particular, be sure that the staff writing the narrative, drafting the budget, and implementing the project collaborate on the application. We recommend that when you upload application documents, file names should be descriptive and match the language in the NOFO. For example, include the phrase proposal narrative in the file name. And we also ask that you take note of all deadlines. Recall the grants.gov deadline is before the Just Grants deadline. Next slide. Do not include reference materials, including attachments that the NOFO does not request. Reviewers will not look at any extra materials, meaning that doing too much may negatively impact your score. Please demonstrate your expertise by showing us what you do, not copying and pasting language from the NOFO. We want to read about the great work you do in your community in your own words. Do not go over the budget cap. Be very careful to follow all formatting and technical requirements. These are not just guidelines, they have an impact on your score. Print out the final document and carefully proofread and review your application to ensure accuracy and completeness. And I think with that, we can move to the next slide. We're going to pause one final time to allow you to either raise hands or we'll review questions. I see there's one question in the Q&A at the moment, but we also have this slide that we're going to leave up during this question and answer opportunity. And I will just briefly review them. If you have questions in the preparation of an application that deal with programmatic requirements, you can reach out to our team. And we've listed here the inbox, the email box that you could email us inquiries, which is preferred. We also provide our phone number. For financial questions, we've listed here for you the email inbox for our Grants Financial Management Division, and they could assist you. I believe they also prefer emailed inquiries, but they've provided their phone number as well. And then for any technical questions that you might have related to grants.gov or Just Grants, we've listed contact information where you can reach out with questions specifically related to those systems. So having said that, a question in the Q&A. If we are a current ELSI grantee with an end date of 9/30/25, will OVW reach out separately regarding a continuation application?
That's correct. The grant award administrator and authorized representative for your award should have received email notification. If for some reason one of those two people has not, you should tell them that they should reach out to their grant manager.
Thank you, Sandy. I'm not seeing any other questions at this time, but we will pause here just for another moment to see if anyone has something they would like to ask. I will go ahead and say we can close the session. But I want to thank everyone for attending. I and my colleagues on the LAV team, we wish you the best of luck in preparing your applications. And again, for questions that may come up later after this call, or as you are preparing your application, again, the resources on this slide, you can reach our team and others who would be there to answer questions for you. Thank you all.